Hello, everyone. Welcome to Miami Beach Urban Studios. My name is Colette Mello, and I'm in conversation today with artist Camilla Taylor. Thank you all for joining us. FIU Miami Beach Urban Studios, known as MBUS, is an incubator for communication, architecture, and the arts. I'd like to thank the City of Miami Beach Department of Tourism and Office of Cultural Affairs for sponsoring these art talks and their continued support. Camilla Taylor is an LA-based artist and art professor at Occidental College. She attended the University of Utah, Salt Lake City, and pursued a BFA in fine arts with emphasis in printmaking. Camilla received her MFA at California State University in Long Beach in 2011. Camilla's works range from printmaking to glass, from ceramics to fabric and to found objects. Her work has been featured in the Spaceland Biennial, the Art Mouth Gallery, and her solo exhibition, Your Words in My Mouth, just closed at the Track 16 Gallery in LA. Before I hand it over to Camilla, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Reyna, for being my tech support through all these talks and for helping me in the background with this project. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Jennifer Prince for connecting me with Camilla Taylor and for helping me with these art talks as well. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone, if you have any comments or questions, to please make them through the chat function, and I will try to get to them throughout our conversation. So, hi Camilla. Thank you for being here today. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for having me. So part of the presentation really was, I was asked to talk about my work and also my professional practice. And one thing to really highlight is that I'm able to be here because my friend Jennifer Prince recommended me, and I was invited. And she's my former professor from Cal State Long Beach when I was getting my master's degree. And we stayed in touch because I really loved her as a professor and as an artist, and that has expanded my opportunities, and hopefully I can do the same for her one day. So it feels like right now it's very hard to go out and network and to meet anybody, but that's not the case. It can start with your classmates and your professors. We're all in the art world. The art world is just if you're making art. So consider everyone around you in this situation as part of that potential.
Camilla, that's really good advice, especially, I mean, even though we're doing Zoom and everything, but when you're in school, your classmates are, you can be working with them after you graduate. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really important to keep those connections.
My first solo show was given to me by a friend of mine from my undergraduate degree experience. We had our foundations classes together and no other classes, but we became friends. We followed each other's work, and he opened a gallery, and I had my first solo show outside of school in that gallery. And we only made that connection because we stayed in touch and became invested in each other's careers. So that can start right now if it hasn't already.
Wonderful, yeah.
So I'll dive right in. Here's me. If you want to follow me online at all, there's where you can find me, my website and my Instagram handle. I'm just Camilla Taylor pretty much on any platform. So it's easy. I don't like to make it hard. I'm going to discuss my artwork and my influences, and one time when I made an intern cry. Of course, put any questions in the chat and I can answer anything as we go along. Le crime rerum. Some of you may be familiar with this Latin quote, but for me, I think it really says what art is. It's said by Aeneas in the Aeneid by Virgil, written in about like 29 to 19 BC. It means the tears of things, or the full quote, sunt lacrimae rerum et mintem mortalia tengut. There are tears for things, that mortal things touch the mind. He comes back from the Trojan Wars, and he sees, as he lands in Greece, this sculpture that tells the story of the Trojan Wars. this sculpture that tells his story that preceded him. And he says, the creme room, the object weeps for me. I think that's what art is. I think art is communication. It's saying something through an object that we cannot say any other way. One of my influences before I really got seriously into art is this movie by Andrei Tarkovsky, based on the novel by Stanislaw Lem called Solaris from 1972. And beyond the plot, what Solaris is about is our inability to know ourselves, that we are still mysteries to ourselves. So much of our subconscious and the choices we make are unknown, and that we're the continual stranger, really. This is one of my earlier works from, this is actually from before I got my master's degree. And what I'm dealing with initially, what I want to show you is some of the techniques I use to talk about my subject matter. And then I'll show you my recent solo show so you can kind of see how all of those techniques really come together. I love repetition. And when you have several figures that are almost identical, the viewer almost invents a story and inserts themselves in them. For instance, with this piece, I had all of the figures nearly facing the wall. And every single viewer, when they came into this space, they walked around so that the figures all faced them, because we want to involve ourselves. We want to be not just a viewer, we want to be part of any narration. An artist who really inspired me using this kind of subject matter is Juan Munoz, the Spanish sculptor and writer who passed away in 2001. All of his pieces have they're very open-ended, and most of them are just called like conversation piece 1, conversation piece 5. And he tells you very little. It's all about this experience that you have with the figures, that they inform and activate the space, and you get to occupy it with them as opposed to just viewing it from afar. I love that sculpture can really do that more than I think any other medium can, because it occupies the same space with you. You don't feel like you're just looking at it from afar. This piece, Unravel, this is about half of the figures because I ended up selling them off sort of one by one. But the goal with this one was to have these small forms that then together start to feel like almost this threatening presence that is excluding you. They're only 4 feet tall, but when you have 20 of them all clustered together, it starts to feel a little frightening. And when they're clustered, they say one thing, versus when one of them is maybe at a distance, and people start talking about how that one's being bullied or that one's the leader. We take these very small clues and build an entire narration around it. It's kind of, our minds are just built for that. This is relief print on fabric. And another thing I love about relief printmaking is it's the medium of story. Literature is a print, and the reason we're all literate in the world is because of relief printmaking and movable type. I don't really love going into technique too much, but I like breaking these ones down. So this is what the piece looked like before it was constructed. This is the print on paper before I cut out all of these pieces and sewed them together to create these sculptures. So you can see how the form flows across each pattern piece and then comes together to form the three-dimensional image. This one, they've already left, is also about, in addition to this activation of the space, the limits of empathy. How far can you push a figure and the viewer still wants to involve themselves in it and feel like it's animated and something they can empathize with. So these are very far from a human being. They don't even have heads, but people felt like this deep well of sympathy for them and wanted to protect them. I use this symbol a lot, and I did not realize it had a historic precedence. It's mirroring specifically, but also the mirrored hands. And in Egyptian mythology, this symbol is called the Ka, one of the 3 or potentially 9 parts of the soul, depending on which Egyptologist you ask. And here you can see it on the head of King Hor. The Ka is the spark of life. Another example of mirroring is these copies of Janus. These are sort of modern copies of medieval statues. Janus is the god of time, choices, and duality. One of the ways I use this idea of mirroring is in this symbol that I've returned to for like the last decade called the hungry arms. And one thing I like about just using hands and arms in a piece is it sort of forces people to think about how they relate to it with their own body. And this gesture is a solipsistic gesture. It's one you can't make away from yourself. To have the thumbs meet like that, you make it towards yourself. It's encircling yourself. This one's compass. I think of the hands as like, as hungry, as like open mouths, but they're hungry for something that isn't literal food. They're seeking, grasping, they're always open in this activated gesture. But they're hungry for something, again, that's not food. It's about self-consumption, I think, about as an artist or as a creator, the way we, in many ways, destroy ourselves to make something else. We work so hard and, you know, destroy so much in our lives in order to do something that maybe is not necessarily what everybody wants. This piece is called The Search, and often when I've shown it, there'll be a select group of people who say, you should have called this one The Hug, because it looks like a hug. And I had a collector want to buy it, and they said that they were going to tell everyone that it's called The Hug, not The Search. And I said, absolutely not. You cannot own this. I will not sell it to you. And I've still never sold it because I feel like I've sacrificed so much to be an artist and worked so hard to do this thing that very few people really care about, that I don't want at that last minute to sacrifice the whole concept behind the work just for what is, in the grand scheme of things, a small amount of money. And I really didn't want anyone to see it and have someone and be told this is called The Hug and it's about loving yourself. That would have just destroyed me, I think. Withholding is also something that I love in artwork. When the art keeps a secret from you and you know that something is not being told to you. You know the information is there and you just don't get to have it. That I find just needles at me so much. I think Blue McWright, who's this artist here in Los Angeles, she does that really well. She's also a great example also, I think, of networking. She was one of my favorite artists. And then I finally worked up the gumption to introduce myself to her. And now she's my friend and she goes to my shows. It's incredible. So you never ever, no artist thinks that they're successful and famous, really. All you gotta do is just introduce yourself and be polite.
Yes, I agree. I think part of it being a successful creative person is showing up at the art events and being there. And, you know, if you have an opportunity to introduce yourself to someone and be polite, you know, and then people get to know you that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment about your hands, the search. I
Yeah.
find it very interesting that you have you have a lot of agency about your work, and that you're not letting people come in and take that curatorial aspect or your artist aspect away from you. I like that.
I think a lot of people like making art where they kind of give up control and are loose and gestural, and that is absolutely not me. I like to control as many aspects as possible. I like a plan. I like lots of steps. I like math involved. I have lots of respect for artists like Cy Twombly, who can just like, you know, have a meditative state and then like do a gesture and it's this incredible masterpiece. That is not at all how I work. Just doing that gives me anxiety to think about. So which brings us to
Meditative
this.
gives you anxiety.
The order of things. And this is about that secret keeping to me. So each of those little horizontal lines on that piece is a strip of paper. So it's cut paper where you're just seeing the very end of the work, like a stacked edge of books. And every single piece of paper is cut up old drawings. And as this, it's glued into the frame, and then as that glue dries, it kind of warps the paper a little, so you can see just a tiny bit of information, but not enough to really ever figure out what's withheld from you. That secret that's kept away, that's secure.
What's the scale of these works? 12
So
by 12?
this one is 42 inches tall by 36 inches wide. And then these two are both 12 by 12 inches. I've continued with this series and talked about how I didn't want to sell a piece because people didn't understand it. I've also made this work, which I feel like has two layers to it. It has this abstract landscape layer. Then it also has this additional layer about withholding and secret keeping. And this is my most financially successful series. These continue to sell really nicely and wonderfully, and could sell better if I would succumb to including color, which I refuse to do. But everybody's got to make decisions about what they're willing to do. This piece is called The Soil. You can see how that hand is positioned away from the viewer. And for me, this is about making a choice in your life and then how that sits with you. Like when you make a decision about, marriage, where to go to school, major life decisions, doesn't matter what it is, how it stays. For me, this is about an abortion I had when I was young. And the fabric is printed with pennyroyal, which is an abortificant. So that's what all of those images, it's a dry point etching on fabric made into a quilt. Those few viewers who come around and spend time with the piece see that there's this tiny figure positioned inside the wrist. So again, it's not really a secret that's kept. The only thing keeping you from seeing it is just labor, is effort. And most people don't put forth a lot of effort. One thing that I learned when I feel like I really grew up as an artist is the difference between the viewer and your audience. Everyone who sees the work is your viewer, but most of them are not your audience. Your audience is who takes the time to understand and appreciate it. And you can't talk to everybody. Not everyone will be your audience. That's a select group. One more secret kept. This is a tiny, tiny little book called To Nothing. I grew up in Utah and I learned to write in this alphabet called the Deseret alphabet. And this little book has a little poem written in Deseret about the desire to share, but also the desire to withhold, to keep private and to keep your past a secret. And anyone could read it if they just took the time to translate it, but no one has. Because why would you? But people, like, this is such a popular object. It's traveled around to several shows, but no one has read it.
Interesting.
These are by Nicola Tyson. She's an artist who draws every single day. And this is where I tell you about how I made an intern cry. So I was visiting San Francisco and went out for a beer with my former intern then. And I asked him what he's been working on. And he said, I haven't been working on anything. I haven't been painting. I've just been, hanging out with friends. And I said, oh, do you still tell people you're an artist? And he said, yeah. And I said, you haven't worked on painting in 3 years. So are you an artist? What do artists do? Then he started crying. That was not my goal. My goal was to try to get him to go back in the studio and do the thing that he wants. Because I think artists make art. If you spend more time being mixed up in other things in your life, that's great. That's fine. But if you're an artist, artists make art. There's this great quote by Sarah Thornton, 33 Artists in 3 Acts, where she says, I see artists' studios as private stages for the daily rehearsal of self-belief. Every time we make art, we tell ourselves and the world, this matters. What I have to say matters, and it's important. And when you stop doing that, when you stop making art, you're telling yourself it's not important anymore. It doesn't have to be good. You just got to do it.
That's a great quote. So did he go back to the studio?
He did. He did.
Okay.
He's making art again. And he has not forgiven me either for making him cry in public in a bar. That was, I was apparently not very nice to my interns.
Well, at least, well, he got back to the studio, so that was
Yes.
the point.
Thank
So
you, Colette. Thank you. Everyone else, when I told that story, is like, oh, poor Jose, why are you so mean? I think it was good. It was inspiring.
it was the critique.
Yes.
Yeah. You have to be tough sometimes with the critique.
You gotta be.
Yeah.
So these are where I'm moving into the idea of disfiguring the body and distortion. I think that the body is really it's how we think of ourselves, but these distortions are not mimicking a real life body. It's mimicking a subconscious body, the way we dream about ourselves, the way we feel about our own and other bodies in our subconscious. So kind of in a mannerist mode where I don't feel totally married to physiology anymore. Instead, it's about the impression of bodiness, the displacement of the figure, and how that gesture can make you feel so much more vulnerable, as opposed to if it were perfectly anatomically correct. I think the difference really between art and illustration is what it's for. I think illustration is for answering a question, whereas art is asking a question that the viewer kind of has to answer within themselves. And this quote from this beautiful book in Watermelon Sugar, I think encapsulates that to me. If you were thinking about something that happened a long time ago, somebody asked you a question and you did not know the answer, that is my name. That art should not, to be successful, it should stay inside of you. You should continue to think about it. Whereas an illustration is something that it finishes something. It doesn't open something. And this isn't a critique of the two sort of distinct professions. It's more about the idea of what the thing does. I have friends who are illustrators who I would consider more artists, really. And now I'm moving kind of into the idea of distortion, but also of isolation. So focusing on small parts of the body and on materials that help with that. So these are glass, and I wanted to work in glass because I wanted it to be a material that when you learn what the object is made out of, it adds a new level to that experience. The object now has this coldness and fragility to it that if it were, say, made out of resin, you would not really feel the same way. Like when I learn that something is made of glass, I almost feel like it's viscerally cold. Whereas if I learn something's made out of resin, like I know it has a particular feel to it. Unremitting this piece, I made it when a good friend of mine had just been murdered, and it's about pain, about walking in snow barefoot, the experience of walking in snow barefoot, if anyone has ever done that. I have many times growing up, and your feet just curl in on themselves. Even if you're trying not to, your body reacts to the pain and tries to protect itself. So it's the foot making that action, and then the color coming through in the same way that cold comes through. The first time I got to show this woman, this lovely Black woman came, and she said she had just done the genealogy for her family, and she learned that her 3 times great grandmother had fled slavery and walked until the skin came off her feet. And then she started crying. And she said this made her feel that the pain that her great great grandmother had felt to find freedom for her and her family. And I felt like that was the most I'd ever been able to touch someone with my work.
That's
and
neat. Yeah.
Yeah. And it, I don't know, that made me so happy. And also sad. I mean, that feeling of communication, of immediacy.
Right. Well, your work is very powerful. You definitely feel emotions when you see your work, and it's very intimate as well.
This is an anime by Satoshi Kon called Paranoia Agent. Have any of you seen it? I love it. It is one of my favorite shows I've ever seen. It's about shaping reality with your words. One person can change the way everyone else experiences reality. If you have not seen this, I highly recommend it. It's excellent. Satoshi Kon died quite young, in his early 40s. And if you look him up, he has the most beautiful message about art making that he released to the world just before he passed away. That I'm not going to read to you because I did not copy and paste it, I'm afraid. So now we'll move into my show, and I'm almost out of time, so we'll see how far we get in it. Just packed this up yesterday, so I'm still feeling like the postpartum from having a show
Oh,
come
this
down.
is your show that just closed. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Wonderful.
and I like to structure a show like an essay, where you start with a thesis statement, and this is my thesis statement. Everyone on this wall is a notable liar. And then I included myself. So this is me, the self-portrait, because we're all liars. Everyone deceives, everyone withholds, everyone shapes reality a little bit with our deceptions. This is Joseph Beuys in the center. And if we have time at the end, I'll tell you Joseph Beuys' story because I think it's phenomenal. And, you know, they all have great stories. We won't get into it too much. Notable liars. First thing you see as you move past these portraits is this sculpture, but I remember it differently. And I think she looks like she's saying something, like she's about to tell you something. She's objecting. Her lips are parted. Her nose is a little flared. And most people just walk right past. They keep going. Some look through her neck and see the tiny figure sitting there, clutching their knee, looking a little miffed. And it's rare, maybe 50% at most, catch the figure. And again, not everyone is the audience, but that's okay. This book on Longing by Susan Stewart really changed how I thought about scale and how we react to scale. It's on phenomenology and semiotics, if that's something that interests you, thinking about how we read imagery. I highly recommend it. Excellent book. She's a great writer. So this piece is sort of informed by that work, one to the other. It's 120 unique chairs, but each of those chairs is at most 3 inches tall. They're teeny tiny. And they individually feel very, very precious, I think, but then as a whole have this oppressiveness. 120 because there are 12 people in my immediate family, and I wanted it to feel like a factor of 12, because it's like a family gathering where all of the disparate chairs in your house come together, you know, and everyone has a place to sit, but it's not a chair that normally belongs in that room, and it's not necessarily a comfortable one either. Everyone has a role that they are assigned in this temporary situation that they perform. That's what I think chairs are. Chairs are like this little temporary role, this statement that you finish, that you complete by sitting in it. So that's what the stairs throughout the show are. And everything in the show is very much a domestic space. It's just sort of reimagine these domestic objects. These are all dining room chairs also, because that's when you are performing for others. I mean, I could have used office chairs right now because that's when we're all performing for everybody else on Zoom now. Feels like everybody, for all I know.
I have a question here, Camilla.
Yes.
It'd be interested to hear how Camilla relates her 3D practice to her 2D practice. Does she begin with one such as a drawing and then move to 3D?
I start with a drawing, and then I often make a print from the drawing, but not always. I always start with drawing. Always, always. That's how I think. I know a lot of people who are trained in sculpture who don't really draw at all, but I'm trained in printmaking, and we always start with a drawing. And I feel like that's how I make my plans, is figuring out how to relate to it, how I want people to relate to it, the space it should occupy. And then sometimes that also becomes a print. And oftentimes those are just limitations of time or space. Like you can make prints often a lot easier than you can make big sculptures. And this one I think relates to printmaking as well. It's partially a print. This tablecloth is mono printed, but the heads are all mold made. And printmaking is about repetition often and how those repetitions relate to each other. In traditional printmaking, you only really see one, but those of us who work in the studio, when we make multiple, we can visually see what that statement says when I see 15 of the same image versus when I see one. And so that's really what got me to start thinking about making sculptures that as a finished piece is intended to be viewed as a multiple, like this piece, which is 17 heads. And each of the heads is all a reproduction from an original that is not here. 17, because it's a prime number, because I think if I were to see this, I would try to reorder the star in my head. And as a prime number, that star will always be one continuous thread. But if it were a non-prime, you could potentially reorder it so that it was not a continuous thread. You know, think of 6. 6 could easily be 2 separate threads, each a rectangle, right? Thread is a metaphor for story, and each of the heads is sharing one small piece of the same story, or one small version of that same story. And then this is a little bow right here that holds it all together that I wanted to be very visible so it feels tenuous, like you, the viewer, could come and just pull it and the whole thing would fall apart. These flowers are mock orange flowers, which in the language of flowers mean falsity or deception. So it's just like this nice little layer that's underneath the other information. Houses, also in the show, I have several of these dry points of houses. And these are all doll houses. None of these are of real houses that anyone can occupy, and they all have 2 stories for a reason. I am curious if anyone has experienced this. Have you ever had a dream where you return to a house where you grew up or lived in for a long time, but something about the house has changed? You can do a hands up if anyone has had this experience. I see heads nodding. Okay. Only like 5%, because I've been keeping track of people I have asked, have not. It is the vast majority of us have had this experience. I think the house is us kind of inventing a space in our psychology that we can then walk through. And the space is the architecture of our mind that we can then experience at the same time as an animate person in the dream. Gaston Bachelard talks about this phenomenon a little bit in The Poetics of Space. This is a super easy read if you care about phenomenology. I'm sure Jennifer has read this one. I'm sure Neil has. It's great. It's a beautiful book also. It's about phenomenology in relationship to architecture. Gorgeous. Recommend it. So this is about that dream house. Every one of these houses is the same house with something slightly changed. They're all from the same pattern, but each one has been changed ever so slightly. Just the way each time we are a new version of ourselves, that house in our brain and our dream changes a little bit. And we're not one house. We're not a new person when that house changes. We are all of the houses. Every single version is what a person is. Maybe just show one of them at a time, though. Here's a close-up of this little house. So again, I think this relates to printmaking too, just this idea of the repetition and how changing something slightly and then repeating it changes the way you, the viewer, relate to it. This is also a factor of 12. It's a dodecahedron, which is a 12-sided shape. This figure, comfort of a story repeated, returning to that same idea of the thread as story, but now she's bound in the story. And this lie, deception, version of the self, it's comforting contains you, but it also imprisons you and holds you in. My favorite part of this piece are these. I love the shadow that it casts.
Beautiful.
This piece, Shame, the little heads are the same heads from the table. And it's again about story. The print is a monoprint of roots, the information withheld, the information below the ground, repeating and changing over and over, comforting, but also containing. Which brings us to stairs. So, domestic architecture. The first floor is the floor where we welcome the public. You know, you have the parlor or the living room, the dining room. It's where members from the public can come into your private space. There's also the half bathroom is a bathroom that is specifically designed for just guest use. No, usually that's not even used by, or it's not designed to be used by the occupants of the house. The upstairs is the most private spaces, the bedrooms, the private bath. And then above that, the most private space, the attic. So stairs are this intimation that there is information withheld, that there is information that is present, but that you do not have access to. I have all of these stair prints as well throughout the show. And the last thing you see when you move through this space are these solid glass staircases when the habit of withholding becomes something in and of itself, divorced from the information you tell and the information withheld. The first floor and the second floor, they're just the habit of the withholding in and of themselves. Here's one of them close up. Okay, now we're ready for Q&A. Got a little bit of time left, hopefully.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're open. If anyone would like to have a comment or question, please put it in the chat. So one of the things I wanted, if you would share with us where you are. Are you in your studio? Are you at home? How has the pandemic affected your practice? Have you been able to make artwork during this time, or?
I'm at home, and my studio is at home as well. I have a detached garage that I work in. I lost access to a lot of things I was planning on using, but like that show that I just showed you, I made almost entirely during the pandemic. And so the prints were originally going to be etchings, but I don't have the chemicals in my home studio to do that, so they became plastic dry point prints. The houses were originally going to be entirely carefully hand cut with a scroll saw, and I don't have access to a wood shop anymore, so I had them laser cut. But I mean, I have a big kiln and I do have a small press, so I do have a pretty well-equipped studio.
Wow, you have a kiln. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how your professional life as a professor informs your artistic life? How are you balancing that?
I feel like I don't know that it informs my professional life as much as it helps to give my life structure. When you're an artist who doesn't have any outside employment, you can kind of wake up whenever you want, and it's easy to have significantly less discipline in your work. And I'm currently teaching very little, and I like just teaching 1 or 2 classes a semester because it kind of feel like I work harder then, because I value the time that I have outside of class so much more. And I get into the habit of waking up at the same time and not working till 3 in the morning. I have to go to bed because I have to teach in the next day. But to be honest, I have found, and I don't think this is a positive thing, but I have found a lot of people in academia, a lot of the professors I know, they don't engage as much with the art world outside of academia as they could. And I think that's especially true for printmaking, that we become really comfortable in this world of showing in other university art galleries, and it's a lot more frightening to approach people in commercial galleries. And I think we need to break ourselves of that, move beyond it more if we can.
Okay. I have a question here. absolute fan of your work. I was wondering the significance of the use of grayscale as your color palette.
It's personal preference. I do really prefer looking at something that is in all black. I have a little bit of synesthesia, and I feel like color is very loud to me, and it feels like listening to white noise in my head when I look at very colorful work, whereas black is it's like this smooth quietness to look at. And then it's also about the way a lot of people don't dream in bright colors. I like to talk about the subconscious aspects of ourselves. And a lot of people don't dream in bright colors. A lot of people dream only in black and white. I dream in color, but that phenomenon that color is something that feels much more intentional, something that we have to be we have to pay attention to and be consciously aware of, whereas black and white feels like something that can kind of hit you from behind. And then I also like when something is all black. Let me see if I can find a nice example of one. And it looks like a hole at the same time that it looks like a three-dimensional object. Here's one. So these figures, I like that when you walk in on them and you see them against the wall, that it can feel both three-dimensional or like an absence and like a two-dimensional just ink drawing, that visually it can work on these different layers all at the same time.
Thank you. I have, let's see here. Any advice or recommendations on improvement for beginner artists?
Yes, editing. So I have found that a lot of beginner artists, because we appreciate things well beyond our own capabilities, and then you want your work to achieve as many concepts at once, to really hone in on one thing at a time. Like, don't try to do a great figure drawing with like faulty light logic before you're good at figure drawing and at light logic. Like, play with one crazy thing at a time before you start mixing them up too much, and have patience with yourself. Most artwork is trash. Most artwork that everyone makes is trash. And that's not being mean. It's because most artwork is practice. And we don't say, like, anytime a musician goes into the studio and practices, that they're terrible musicians just because like that one song wasn't great. We understand that you have to practice to get good. So just be patient with yourself and realize that most of what you do is not going to be what you want to show people, but it's just a step towards the thing that's worth showing.
Thank you. That's really good advice. I think, yes, editing. I think that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of your practice with us. We're a little bit out of time, but I thank you so much. It was great to learn about your artwork and to meet you. And I see some of your friends here, so I'm going to mute everyone and they can say hi to you. Give me 1 second. If you like to say hello and give virtual applause to Camilla.
Camilla, how are
Hi,
you?
Neil. Hi, Beatrice. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Camilla, great job. Good to see and hear you.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for coming. It's and Neil and Jennifer, you're both my friends who teach at this school. You should meet each other and be
Oh,
friends.
yes.
Yes. We'll have to do that by way of Camilla.
Yes.
Yes. So thank you again, Camilla. Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. I love your artwork. I hope to see you in Miami sometime, or maybe when I get out to California on the other side of this crazy time that we're living through. I'd love
to come sometime. I'd love,
that would be great.
Love that.
So thank you everyone for joining us. We will be back next Monday with another art talk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye,
And
Camilla.
Thank you. Bye.
Any further questions for me, feel free to message me on Instagram. I'm on there just as Camilla Taylor, or on Facebook or wherever.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.